National Guard. National Guard? Does you let me know what's happening here?
Did we? You need men in these buildings. There are people inside and they're gonna be running right into the line of fire. You take them through the basement or through the subway. You keep them off the streets. I need a perimeter as far back as 39th.
Why the hell should I take orders from you?
Because I'm popular and no one has ever heard of you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Islamic Defense Podcast. So today we are talking about a very special person, the Zionist superhero, Mr. Ben Shapiro. Now, the reason I'm discussing him is because, according to his own word,
you talk about undermining the public discourse. It seems to me that simply going through and finding lone things that sound bad out of context and then hitting people with them is a way for you to make a quick buck off the fact that I'm popular and no one has ever heard of you.
Oh, no.
So let's take a look and see what he has to say about Islam and Muslims. So yeah, let's take a look.
A couple of weeks ago, HBO's Bill Maher got into it with the Islamic expert and horrifyingly mediocre actor who should never, ever, 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 ever play Batman, Ben Affleck. Never, ever, 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 ever play Batman. Never, ever, 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 ever play Batman.
Of course, I'm pretty sure the only person that is capable of playing Batman is you, but let's continue.
Now, the question isn't whether Islam itself is violent. It's what its adherents believe, because that's what they act upon. There's plenty of violent material in the Old and New Testaments. Hey, I'm an Orthodox Jew. I read the Old Testament a lot. But believers in those particular texts are not currently ramming airliners into towers or beheading journalists or mutilating female genitalia.
This is a lie. Believe it or not, Christians and Jews can be just as violent as Muslims. As a matter of fact, according to a report by BBC and a wiki page that we can see that if you look at the history of terrorism, especially from the year 1800 to 1969, most of the terror attacks were done either by Christians, Jews, or nationalists, or communist atheists, or anti-theist. And this completely contradicts Ben's theory. I mean, if this is really the case that Muslims believe in a violent ideology, then how come most of the terrorists from the year 1800 to 1969 are all non-Muslims? Or at least most of them are non-Muslims. Again, Ben is committing the non-sequitur fallacy. I mean, if Muslims really believe in a violent ideology, then they would always be violent and more active in terrorism than others. However, we don't see that. We see the opposite of that. So let me put this argument in a logical form. Premise 1. If Muslims believe in a violent ideology, then they would always be more active in terrorism than others throughout the history. Premise 2. We see that from the year 1800 to 1969, Muslims were not as violent as non-Muslims. As a matter of fact, they were relatively peaceful. This contradicts Ben's theory. Conclusion. Therefore, Muslims don't believe in a violent ideology. Now let's continue.
So, let's examine the question. Is radicalism in the Muslim world a tiny minority phenomenon? So to answer that question, we need to define our terms. We're really not talking about people who are active terrorists. Radical beliefs are a lot broader than terrorists, and anybody who argues otherwise is being naive or foolish or disingenuous. But terrorists draw their moral, financial, and religious support from those who are not terrorists themselves. So, who are the radicals? Ben Affleck actually was right on this. There are approximately 1.6 billion Muslims on the planet, and they're from 49 different countries in terms of where they have a majority. All the population stats, by the way, are from Pew Research as of 2011. Indonesia is the world's most populous Muslim country. It's got almost 205 million Muslims living there. According to one 2009 poll, it showed almost 50% of Indonesians actually support strict Sharia law, not just in Indonesia, but in a lot of countries, and 70% blamed the United States, Israel, or somebody else for 9/11. So, you make that calculation, it's about 143 million people who are radicalized. You scared yet? We're just getting started.
This is a lie. I actually found the Pew Research he's talking about. And according to that research, the amount of people that support the Sharia law in Indonesia are 72%. However, here's the thing. The research data was done only on 38,000 people among millions. So there's no way, shape or form that this research data can somehow represent millions of Muslims that are living in Indonesia. So also here's the thing, that's not the worst part. I mean, he basically cherry picks data, and he takes this data from 38,000 people, and then he applies it to the entire population of Indonesia. I'm not even joking. This is why he gets such a big number. So let's see what the actual number is. So since only 38,000 people were asked in this research data, the real number would be 27,360 radical Muslims, quote unquote, according to Ben's logic. However, somehow, because he put that statistics or that percentage on the entire population, he get like millions. Now, even if we're charitable and accept Ben's logic and say that these people are radical, it's still a fallacy to assume that this small number somehow represent the entire Muslim population of Indonesia. So in other words, Ben is committing the hasty generalization fallacy. Also, Ben is also committing the begging the question fallacy. I mean, why is he assuming that these people are radical? I mean, why are you assuming that, Ben? Is it because these people support Sharia law? Alright, then let's take a look and see what this evil Sharia law is. So according to the scholars from islamq.com, Sharia is, and I quote, Sharia is the entire religion. Fiqh is knowledge of the practical minor Sharia rulings that are derived from detailed evidence. And usul al-fiqh is knowledge of the evidence of Sharia ruling and the way in which these rulings are derived from the evidence, in general or in detail. So in other words, Sharia is the whole religion. So let's see what Islamic Sharia teaches, shall we? I'll read from the Quran. And be steadfast in prayer and regular in charity, and whatever good ye send forth for your souls before you, ye shall find it with Allah, for Allah sees well all ye that you do. You can read about this in Quran 2:110. Ibn Abbas said regarding this verse, and establish prayer, perfect the 5 daily prayers, and pay the poor due. Pay the poor what is due from your wealth, and whatever of good, of righteous deed, and the poor due and charitable works. Ye send before your soul, ye save for yourself. You will find its reward with Allah, from Allah. Allah is seer, knows your intention of what you spend in charity and the poor due. Prophet Muhammad said in a Sahih Hadith, Abu Hurairah reported that Allah's Messenger said, charity does not in any way decrease the wealth and the servant who forgives Allah add to his respect, and the one who shows humility, Allah elevates him in the estimate of the people. I can read about this in Sahih Muslim 2588. So we can clearly see from both the Quran and the Hadith that Sharia commands Muslims to give money to the poor. So in other words, Sharia law commands Muslims to give charity, which means, according to Ben's logic, any Muslim who is following Sharia by giving charity is a radical Muslim. So let me put this argument in a logical form. Premise 1. According to Ben's theory, any Muslim who supports and wants Sharia law in their country is a radical Muslim. Premise 2. We see from Quran chapter 2, verse number 110 and Sahih Muslim 2588 that Sharia law commands Muslims to give charity. Conclusion. Therefore, any Muslim that gives charity or gives money to the poor and helps them is a radical Muslim, according to Ben's logic, because they are following Sharia law. But the real question is, why do you hate charity, Ben? I mean, it seems to me that if anything, Muslims should be more radical, according to your logic. But regardless, let's continue.
Okay, Egypt, 80 million Muslims. According to that same 2009 poll, it showed that 65% want strict Sharia law in every Islamic country, and almost 70% said that they had positive or mixed feelings about bin Laden. So that's 55.2 million more radicals.
This is another lie. In Egypt, 74% want Sharia law, which means 28,120 radical Muslims who want to give charity and be kind to their neighbors. As for the last research data about bin Laden, I couldn't find it anywhere. However, I did find another Pew Research study which was done on 8,989 Muslims in various different countries, including Nigeria and Egypt. And this is a Pew Research, by the way. And so the study showed that overall majority of Muslims who were asked, they basically completely reject any form of religious extremism, with nearly 57% who reject Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, which means 5,123 Muslims hate groups like Al-Qaeda. However, that doesn't mean that the others support them, because the same study also says that 67%, which means almost 6,022 Muslims are worried about terrorism. So this clearly shows that they don't support terrorism. So another point for the lie count.
Pakistan has almost 179 million Muslims. 76%, just over 3/4, want strict Sharia law in all Islamic countries. That is another 135.4 million radicals.
Another lie by Ben. So about 84% Muslims in Pakistan want Sharia law to be the law of the country, which means nearly 31,920 Muslims want Sharia law for their country. And this lying scumbag said that it's nearly 135 million people. Did your mother drop you when you were a baby, Ben? I mean, either that or you just don't know how math works.
Bangladesh. Not a country you tend to think of as Muslim, but there are 149 million Muslims living there. As of 2013, just over a quarter said suicide bombings or targeting of civilians was sometimes justified. Another 82% want Sharia to be the official law of the country, and 2/3 said honor killings of women can sometimes be justified. Honor killings, 2/3. It's 121.9 million radicals.
Another lie. So the actual study says that the majority of Muslims say that suicide bombing is not justified. That's because in Islam, suicide is prohibited. The Prophet ﷺ said in a Sahih Hadith, Junaib reported that the Messenger of Allah, peace be upon him, said, "A man among those before you was wounded. He was in such anguish that he took a knife and slit his wrist and let the blood flow until he died. Allah Almighty said, my servant has preceded me with his soul, so I have forbidden paradise for him." Read about this in Sahih al-Bukhari 3276. So we can clearly see that suicide is completely prohibited for Muslims. So approximately 71% of Bangladeshi Muslims have said that suicide bombing is never justified, which means that nearly 26,980 Muslims from 38,000 disagree with suicide bombing, and only 9,880 Muslims from 38,000 said suicide bombing is sometimes justified. However, if anything, this shows that their lack of education regarding Islam, because in Bangladesh, where I live, by the way, education is a big issue. A lot of Muslims just don't know about Islam that much, and so radicalism is a big threat here because people just don't know about Islam. If they get the proper knowledge, then they wouldn't be supporting terrorism because it's not Islamic. Islam is against terrorism. So hopefully with videos like this, they can learn that suicide is not allowed in Islam. However, the fact remains that Ben Shapiro lied about the number. He said that there are over 121 million Muslims in Bangladesh who support suicide bombing, when in reality it's only 9,880 Muslims. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still bad, but it's not even a fraction of what Ben says it is. He also lied about the second figure as well. He said that nearly 121 million wants Sharia law in Bangladesh, when the study actually says that only 31,160 among millions want Sharia law in Bangladesh. Again, he lied. He also lied about honor killing in Bangladesh as well. Now, the research he quoted does not specify clearly how many people were asked. However, they said that in each country, 10 people were asked, judging from the data, which consists of 37 countries, so which means that only 370 people were asked.
Among those 370 people, 30% think honor killing is sometimes justified, which means only 111 people from 149 million think honor killing is sometimes justified. Again, it's not even a fraction of what he said.
One of the most popular fatwa website, Islam QA, says regarding honor killing, killing a Muslim unlawfully is a serious matter and a grave crime. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, in Surah Al-Nisa, and whoever kills a believer intentionally, his recompense is hell. to abide therein, and the wrath and the curse of Allah are upon him, and a great punishment is prepared for him. You can read about this in chapter 4, verse number 93. They also quote a hadith which says, the hadith is in Bukhari, 6355. It is narrated by Ibn Umar, may Allah have mercy upon him, who said that the Prophet Muhammad said that the believer will continue to be encompassed by mercy of Allah so long as he does not shed the blood that is forbidden for him to shed. So we can clearly see that honor killing is absolutely forbidden in Islam. However, regardless, let's continue. Ben lied 3 times here.
Nigeria, 75.7 million Muslims live there. 71% favor Sharia law. That's 53.7 million people.
Another lie. The real numbers is only 26,980 from 93 million, which is again not even a fraction of what he said.
Iran, 74.8 million Muslims. 83% favor implementation of Sharia law as of last year, so that's 62.1 million more radicals.
Again, another lie. This research conducted interviews among 1,522 people. From that, 83% says that they support Sharia law, which means only 1,263 people support Sharia law from nearly 80 million Muslims. Now, to be fair, Iran does have Sharia law as their constitution, just like Saudi Arabia. So it's likely that they might have bigger support for Sharia. However, I'm simply quoting what the data says. So I'm not going to generalize based on such a small number, because that would be fallacious. Either way, Ben lied. He said that nearly 62.1 million Muslims support Sharia law, when the data actually says that only 1,263 Muslims support Sharia law.
Turkey has 74.7 million Muslims. And 32%, this is a moderate Muslim country, probably the most moderate Muslim country, 32% said honor killings of women could actually be justified sometimes. So that's 23.9 million radical Muslims in our moderate ally, Turkey.
Another lie. The real number is 180 people who think that honor killing is sometimes justified, from a population of 74 million Muslims. Like I said, it's still bad, but not even a fraction of what Ben said.
Morocco, 32.4 million Muslims live there. Just over 3/4 support Sharia law. That's 24.6 million radical Muslims in Morocco.
This is another lie. No, in Morocco only 31,540 people want Sharia law from a population of 32 million. Again, Ben said 24 million people want Sharia law, when the real number is barely a fraction of that.
Iraq, 31.1 million Muslims live there. 78% say honor killings of women can sometimes be justified. That amounts to 24.3 million Muslim radicals.
Another lie about Iraq. The real number is 288 out of 370, when Ben said the number is 24 million.
Hello everyone. While editing this video, I realized I made a huge mistake in my calculation regarding the number of those who support the honor killing of women. I accidentally added those who do not support the honor killing of women in my calculation. This is a very silly mistake, and I do apologize. So throughout the video, whatever number I have presented regarding support of honor killing of women from the Pew Research, you have to know that the actual number is much lower than that. Again, sorry for the mistake and the interruption, so let's carry on with the video.
Afghanistan, 24 million people. A huge majority, 76%, support at least occasionally or just once in a while honor killings of women. 99% actually want Sharia to be the law of the land, so it's like a Cuban election over there. 24 million radical Muslims over in Afghanistan.
Another lie about Afghanistan. The real number about honor killing is 281, when Ben said it's 24 million. As for Sharia law, the real number is 37,620, when Ben said it's 24 million.
Jordan, smaller Muslim country, 6.4 million Muslims. Right now, Hamas is enjoying like a 60% approval rating, so 3.8 million radical Muslims in Jordan, which is, again, a moderate country.
Another lie about Jordan. So according to actual research, out of 8,989 Muslims, only 45% support Hamas, which is about 4,045 Muslims, when Ben said it's nearly 3.8 million.
Palestinian areas, right? We're sending literally hundreds of millions of dollars to the Palestinian areas. We are, the American taxpayers. 4.3 million Muslims live in the Palestinian areas. 78% of those had positive or mixed feelings about bin Laden. 89% support terror attacks on our ally, Israel. 89% support Sharia law. We should give them a state, folks. That's 3.83 million radical Muslims.
This is another lie. Only 35% of Palestinians from 8,989 support or have favorable views toward Al-Qaeda. So the actual number is 3,146 Muslims from among 4.3 million Muslims, when Ben said the number is 3.83 million. He also lied about Palestinians supporting terror attacks. The real number is 62% from 8,989 Muslims, which means nearly 5,573 Muslims from among 4.3 million Muslims, when Ben said it's 3.83 million Muslims, which for him is like pie in the sky, probably. And he also lied about the support for Sharia law among Palestinians. The real number is only 33,820 from 4.3 million Muslims, when Ben said it's 3.83 million Muslims who support Sharia law. So again, he lied 3 times here.
How about in the West? Okay, let's take it to France. France, 4.7 million Muslims live there. A 2007 poll showed 35% of French Muslims said suicide bombings could sometimes be justified. It's 1.6 million radical Muslims living in France.
This is another lie. So I found this research and it was done on nearly 30,000 Muslims, and only 16% said that suicide bombing can sometimes be justified. Again, this is very vague. We don't know what they mean when they say it's sometimes justified. But either way, which means that only 4,800 Muslims from 30,000 said that it can sometimes be justified, when Ben said that it's nearly 1.6 million Muslims. Again, which is not even a fraction of the real. I mean, the real number is not even a fraction of that.
Great Britain, 2.8 million Muslims living there. 78% wanted cartoonists of Muhammad legally prosecuted. So we're talking about 2.2 million radical Muslims in Great Britain.
Now, I'm not sure which research data he's talking about here because I couldn't find it. Find the specific one because he did not share any of his resources. Gee, I wonder why. However, I found one which is very similar, but it is the latest one. I mean, it came out recently. Now, if this is the research data, then again, he is lying as usual. The research data was done only on 1,000 Muslims. From that, 78% said they were offended by cartoons of the Prophet. It means that only 270 Muslims from 1,000 said that they were offended by this. When Ben said it's 2.2 million Muslims that want to persecute the cartoonist.
How about here in the United States? Well, we have a very moderate Muslim population. We do. 2.6 million Muslims live here, according to Pew Research. 13% said violence against civilians can be justified. 19% said they were either favorable toward Al-Qaeda or just didn't know. You know, because who knows, really? That's almost 500,000 radical Muslims here in the United States.
At this point, Ben is just pulling numbers out of his ass. So I have no idea which research data he's pulling this from, but according to recent study, majority of Muslim Americans have said that violence against civilians for religious cause is never justified, which is aligned with Islam. Again, see my previous video on David Wood if you want to know what I'm talking about. So according to the data, nearly 76% said that violence against civilians for a religious cause is never justified. 12% said that they can sometimes be justified. This research was done on 1,000 Muslims. Another thing to add is that even when they said that sometimes, they clarified in the research that they don't necessarily mean that for religious cause. They're talking about like when a war is going on or civil war or something like that. They basically clarified that in the research that they mean that when people are being attacked or like in a war situation. But according to Ben, they're still radicals, so that would be like 120 Muslims, when Ben said it's 500,000 Muslims, which is a lie. And he also lied about Muslims' view of Al-Qaeda. It's only 28% from 30,000, which means only 8,400 out of 2.6 million Muslims have said that they have somewhat favorable view of Al-Qaeda, when Ben said that it's 500,000.
Here is the total of the countries that we've gone through just now. 680,030,000. 680,030,000 radical Muslims. And that's out of a total population in those countries of 942.4 million Muslims total. And it seems fair to assume that similar proportions of people in countries like, say, like Algeria, Syria, Sudan, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Tunisia, Somalia, and Libya are also radicalized. And if they are, then, well, we're above 800 million Muslims who are radicalized, more than half the Muslims on earth. That's not a minority, that's now a majority, and that's still not even surveying hundreds of millions of Muslims in other countries. In other words, the myth of the tiny radical Muslim minority is just that. It's a myth. And, unfortunately, it's a myth that's going to get a lot of civilized people killed.
This is not okay. This needs to stop now. This is cancer. This is so much cancer that I can feel the tumors growing on my back.
So, okay, here's the funniest part. So he adds all these miscalculated imaginary numbers in his head and gets 680 million radical Muslims, when in reality the number is only 292,086 Muslims, which is not even a fraction of 680 million. Then he starts adding more magic numbers that he pulled out of his ass. So out of nowhere he adds 200,000 Muslims in there. Which magic spell did he use to get this number? Anyway, so the real radical Muslim number would be 292,086 Muslims. But hey, you know what? Let's be charitable today and give Ben this magic number. So we have 400,000 radical Muslims out of 1.8 billion Muslims. This is again not even a fraction of 1.8 billion people. So now, Ben, I'm going to have to disappoint you and say that this is not only a tiny minority, but this is like a tiny dot in a paper on this massive earth. Again, other than honor killing, believing in Sharia is not something that can be called radical, because Sharia includes all things Islam. That means being religious, being spiritual, showing kindness, love, mercy, etc. You know, the universal moral code that both Christians and Jews believe in. And people who follow this cannot be called radicals. If you do call them radical, then you are being
naive or foolish or disingenuous.
Exactly. With that, I'm done with this Zionist moron. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.